We are back with season 2 of the Let's Debate podcast powered by Delahanty Media. I'm your co-host, Nick Delahanty. If you are new to our show, we thank you for tuning in. If you have listened to our show before, we thank you for returning. We have a lot to talk about. We're going over the NBA draft today. A little bit of a different format, but we're excited to be back on the air. I want to throw it to my co-host, Kyle Delahanty. Kyle, it's been a while, but how's it going?
It has been a while. Like Nick mentioned, season 2, welcome back. I'm excited to talk sports. I feel like it's been a minute since we've been able to do this. We missed a lot? Yes, but do we have a lot to talk about still? Absolutely. And there's no better way to start this up than talking about the NBA draft recap. So I say we jump into it.
Now, if you're new to the show, obviously find our social media. You can find it all throughout our channel, all throughout our social media feeds. Make sure you tune in for all the latest news regarding the Let's Debate podcast and more. Now, for you, you're a Brooklyn Nets fan. And for me, I'm really an NBA free agent. You know, I don't follow a team necessarily. I'm a Kevin Durant guy. So where Durant goes, I kind of just follow. So I guess you could consider, my loyalty is kind of with the Nets because of Durant, but I'm not really a diehard fan. What were your expectations heading into this draft? First of all, knowing this level of the draft class, but what was your expectation for them as they were sitting at number 19?
Yeah, well, I mean, that I've been a huge college basketball fan for years now. Basically growing up, I was a huge college basketball fan. I used to follow it so closely. I'm a big North Carolina fan. So typically going into the draft, I'd know about all the prospects, right? And last year, I really didn't follow college basketball as much as I typically do, at least as to what I noticed. And I felt that this draft was pretty weak. So as a Nets fan, considering, you have Kyrie Irving, you have Kevin Durant coming in healthy this year. There's all the trade rumors about James Harden. I looked at the draft sitting at 19 and I said, who's really going to be there? And I was wondering, are we going to draft someone at 19? Are we going to trade out of that? Are we going to trade that for a guy like James Harden? But ultimately, I mean, we're not going to talk about it just this moment, but what ended up happening with the Nets, I'm extremely happy, and I think they made the right move.
And this was one of those years where I think we could both agree it wasn't your typical year where you have that consensus number 1 overall pick. It wasn't that year where your top 7 to 8 picks could be considered for a top 3 pick. It seemed like it was a very weak draft, but it kind of had that feel of the same 3 guys being mentioned in the top 3. You had Anthony Edwards out of Georgia. You had James Wiseman, who had his fair share of issues in college basketball. And then you had LaMelo Ball. Do we have to say more about the Ball family? They just seem to be a little hectic in themselves. But those were the 3 guys. Out of those 3, if you were sitting on the clock at number 1, who would you have gone with and why?
I mean, I think I have to ask the question, what team would I be sitting at 1? Am I the Timberwolves?
Yeah, if you're the Timberwolves, who would you have gone at 1?
It's tough. I mean, listen, they were Anthony Edwards. If you're looking at Anthony Edwards, highlights, listen, the kid's extremely athletic. I mean, he's very, very talented. He reminds you a lot of Victor Oladipo, to be honest with you. But I have question marks about some of the things that he said throughout the draft process, mentioning how he's not really that passionate about basketball. If he had an opportunity to play football, he'd leave in a second. And that he doesn't really love basketball. He mostly plays it because he's that good. So I don't know if that's really someone I'd want to build around. I'm into more of a passionate player. And you got Wiseman, who you and I were talking about pretty highly of early on in the season when we noticed Golden State was kind of, falling apart throughout the year, and we realized, man, they might get a 7'1" center, the one position that they've pretty much been missing out on. And for him to go that high in the draft, playing only 3 college games, I think that goes to show the potential that he has and the ceiling. But then you have LaMelo Ball. And if you're a basketball fan, we all know about the Balls. I mean, LeVar pretty much put them on the map. I'm a big fan of Lonzo. I'm not giving up on Lonzo yet in the NBA. I think he really needs to just find the right place and get that motor going. But I think LaMelo is legit. I really do. If you asked me a few years ago, I'd say I can't really see him going that high in the NBA draft. I think him going and playing internationally really helped him out. I think it matured him a lot. And I think if Charlotte's able to kind of build something there, he could have that impact like a Luka on the Mavericks. I really do. I think that international play, his size, and his style of play. So I think if I'm the Timberwolves, I think they made the right choice based on what their need was. Um, but I think if I'm just talking about the one that I think might be best out of them, I truly think it might be LaMelo Ball. I really do. So um, I think the T-Wolves made the right choice based on their situation, but I got to go LaMelo. What do you think?
I agree with you there. There's a lot of question marks around Edwards, and you listen to this guy talk, and like you said, the passion's just not there, and that's a little concerning because what happens if he wakes up tomorrow and he says, you know what, I don't want to play basketball anymore? That's something that you have to keep in mind, especially given you're thinking this guy's going to be a cornerstone of your franchise. What happens if he doesn't put in the effort and the work and he becomes a complete bust? That's always an issue, and I think that if the draft went the way they wanted it to, they would have traded out of that pick, but unfortunately, they probably couldn't find anybody that was really saying, you know, I need to move up to get this guy. So draft kind of trade perspective there kind of limited them. I love the Wiseman pick for the Warriors. Klay Thompson out for the year again. That's a big blow to them. It looks like they're going to get Kelly Oubre from the Thunder, but I love that they're adding depth to that front court. You added a big center, a big physical guy, and like you said, he played in 3 games in college basketball and still was the number 2 overall pick. That to me speaks volumes of what he is, and they say he's a high motor type of guy, a guy who really has an artistic side to him that they said the area where the Bay is going to really impact him and make him thrive even more. So I think it's a great fit. LaMelo Ball at 3 is a steal to me. I think, like you said, he has the potential to go in and be a franchise-changing player. You know, look at Luka. Look at like a Trae Young. Guys who go in, maybe not the best roster ever, but he'll go in and he'll have the opportunity to play right away and grow. And that year overseas definitely helped him as well. So I like the top 3. I think that, like you said, they picked based on need. And if I'm looking at maybe a winner out of that, I'm taking Ball at number 3 as my winner. Now, let's pull up the NBA draft. And we have the entire board listed for you for the first round. And there's a couple of interesting picks there. Number 4, Patrick Williams went to the Bulls. If you go down a little bit, the Knicks at number 8 go Obi Toppin out of Dayton. What was your initial reaction to that pick from the New York Knicks?
I think Obi being taken 8th overall by the Knicks was the splashy, smart move on their part. And I said it earlier, this wasn't a strong draft class. This wasn't a deep draft class. This is considered by most to be a weak draft class. So I think when you put yourself in the Knicks situation, drafting 8th overall, being on the clock, and you're looking at the other prospects on the board, and let's be real, we aren't going to be able to have a true opinion on these guys until they're on the court, and it could take years from now on whether they made the right draft choice or not. But knowing that the Knicks play in New York, having that spotlight, or should I say being in the spotlight, let's be real, they would have taken a lot of heat because they are constantly criticized about the decisions that they make, the draft choices that they make. They would have taken a lot of heat for passing on a guy who was the player of the year last year, contributed to arguably the best season that Dayton's ever had. They were projected to be a 1 seed in March Madness until COVID shut that down. So this is a guy who had a tremendous season last year. He's a guy who we didn't really hear much about until this season, so he obviously made a big name for himself. This is a guy I feel that slid a little bit in the draft, based on how mock drafts have been the past few months. So when you look at it from that perspective, I think they made the splashy, smart move. But only time's going to tell on whether it was the right draft choice or not. What do you think?
At first, I was sitting there with the way the board went. You saw Hayes go at 7. I thought that was a good fit for the Knicks if he would have fell. And I'm sitting there and I'm like, how do you pass up on Tyrese Halliburton? 6'6" guard, 7-foot wingspan, really athletic, seems like a really good character guy. And then they took Toppin, and the college resume speaks for itself. Player of the year. Dayton had a great year, like you mentioned. I like his inside game, and I think that he brings a lot to the table for the Knicks. But I don't think he would have been my first choice. I think that it's a good fit. I think that they, over time he could develop into a nice player in this league. But I just didn't know how the fit was because at the time the Knicks had so much depth in the front court they could have really used a guard. Now, obviously, they made moves later on in the draft to address the guard need, but at that point, I thought Halliburton was a slam dunk. I was a little surprised to see they didn't go with him at number 8.
I think when you were looking at the draft board when the Knicks were on the clock, it had to be between Obi and Halliburton. Obi was the player of the year, but Halliburton was this kid who had a tremendous year out of Iowa State and really made a name for himself. So I don't think they could have went wrong either one, right? But I'm not really necessarily sold on Obi being a good player at the next level. Only time's going to tell. But I know he was a good college player, but I have a few questions. I question what his fit is on the team. Where does he fit in? How is he going to be in the mix? I don't know if he's going to be a starter. I don't know if he's going to be a rotational player because they're extremely front court heavy, right? And my next question is just really questioning the Knicks organization in general because they do not have a good history and do not have a good resume of developing players. Year in and year out, they draft kids, and it's either just a complete miss, the fans are just not happy with the pick to begin with, or they take a talented kid and then he just doesn't pan out. So I question that. It's not a good look for them. But ultimately, I'll say this. The Knicks need to stop putting the pressure on these young kids that they draft. Not helping them with the players that are surrounding them. If they want to take that next step, if they want to become playoff contenders, it's time for them to start packaging some of this young talent and shipping them off for a star player, right? A veteran or a guy in his prime. Or they need to start spending some real money on real free agents during free agency. And bring that guy in or two of them or three of them, whatever you have to do to improve this team and help groom some of these younger guys. Take the pressure off them. Those are the guys who are going to take you to the next level. Those are the guys who are going to put fans in the seats. So until I start seeing that from the Knicks, I'm going to continue to question their decision-making. There was a lot of talk about them taking the next step last year in free agency or getting guys like Kyrie and KD, and they made a lot of bad moves. They constantly make bad moves, so
you're on the right side of the spectrum here. But again, like you said, I don't see him as an all-star. I don't see him as a guy that's going to come in and be a top 10 player in the league. But I do think that over time he could develop into a nice piece for the Knicks. They say that, the majority of his points come from dunks. And if you watch his college highlights, there are times where he can shoot from outside. But what you noticed in the college game, especially later on in the year, teams started to force him to get the ball past the three-point line. So they were making him work for his buckets. In the NBA, it's not going to be that easy to get into the hoop, into the lane. And Dayton, let's be real, how tough is Dayton's college schedule to begin with?
Yeah.
So those are all things that you have to really take into consideration with that pick. You hope it works out for the Knicks. I know you're a Nets guy, so you're not going to say that. But you hope that it works out because a move like that could really help them. I think that they brought in a guy that really respects the area, really loves the area, is a native. You saw when he was on camera how excited he was to be a Knick. So you hope that he can help turn it around. But like you said, they need some playmakers. They need some Showtime guys that bring in fans. And I can name one, but, it's going to be a lot of money for them to force a trade to get him, and that's Russell Westbrook. He may not be the winning player for you, but he'll bring people into the seats.
Yeah, and he'll definitely make them a better team. But the big question mark there is how much, do you got to get rid of to get him? And is he worth building around? Because listen, as good as what Russell Westbrook is, you can't bring him in alone. Then you got to go out and get someone else. And listen, even when he's had talent with him, he still doesn't get them over the hump. And I'm a huge Russell Westbrook fan. I love him. I absolutely love the guy, but it's just the truth. So you got to question, is it even worth bringing him in? Or could you spend that money elsewhere? Or, create a trade package to get someone else? So
if you're the Knicks, you got to look at it in one of two ways. Number one, do you want to win? If you want to win, you don't bring Westbrook in because obviously he's not going to do it alone. But if you're just looking to sell seats, Westbrook's your guy. He's a high energy guy, high motor. He'll bring it every single night. The fans will love him. He'll do a little bit of everything and give you an Oscar Robertson type of feel. And he'll be so happy he's the superstar on the team, and he'll be a perfect fit in that regard. So if you're not worried about winning, he'd be a nice fit. Now, taking the top three out of consideration because we already broke them down a little bit. The remainder of the top 10, what pick did you like the most? Was there any that stood out?
That's tough. You know what? I don't know if this one really stood out to me, and I've never really seen this kid play, but I feel like at 9, Washington getting the I don't know how to pronounce his last name, but the Denny kid. Listen, I'm starting to like these international picks a little bit more. Because of Luka. And you see, listen, sometimes you get those steals. You get Steve Nash, right? Technically, I know he played college in the NBA, but still. I don't think he's international. He's Canadian.
Yeah, he's Canadian.
He's Canadian. I take that back. I'm thinking of Dirk Nowitzki. But listen, regardless, I like his size, and he's been playing pro basketball since he's 16 years old, just like Luka. So I don't know. I keep bringing up Luka, but I feel like that's like a splashy move. I questioned Luka coming into the league, and I think he's the one who really turned me over. But that's a pick that I got to think about. Plus, with John Wall being out constantly with injury, he's a guy who could kind of fill that void. So what do you think?
I like that pick. I thought it was nice, especially for a Wizards team that they may be looking to change things up a bit. And you don't have to really rush him to be a superstar. You can let him groom and grow. And at 9, you didn't have to jump for him. You didn't have to reach for him. It ended up working nicely. The pick that I love is the pick right after, and that's Jalen Smith at 10, the kid out of Maryland. A forward, adds another big body to the mix. The thing I like about it the most, and I'm going to tie the Carolina ties into it because obviously you know how I am, but you have Ayton at center, and you have Booker, obviously. They made the trade for Chris Paul. Now, the big question is, what do you do with last year's first round pick in Cam Johnson? Do you play him as a stretch 4? Do you play him as a 3? Now you're bringing in Smith, a guy who's a traditional 4, and you're allowing Cam to play the wing where he's more confident and more comfortable and where he fits better. Yeah, obviously you're going to have times where Cam can play the 4, and he's a stretch 4, and he can space the floor out and help you out in many different ways. But when you need some big bodies in there, you want Cam to be outside shooting. So to have that ability and bring in a guy at 10 that could be an impact player, maybe he doesn't start right away, but I expect Smith to get a lot of minutes off the bench if he is in that role player type of role. I love the pick. I love the fit, and I thought that it gelled with what they already were building there in Phoenix. I think that was a winning team mentality type of pick because it added to a need that was desperately needed for that team.
Yeah, Phoenix made a lot of nice moves. I think just bringing in Chris Paul is going to help them out tremendously. But listen, we know how Johnson played at UNC too. His size and the way he could shoot, whether he's coming off the bench or he's starting, he's going to work out fine for them. And I think he is a piece that they're looking at like, hey, maybe we found something here. Maybe we could build around him with Booker and DeAndre Ayton. So, look, Phoenix is a team that's up and coming. There's no doubt about it. And you add Chris Paul and you see what he did for OKC last year when everyone thought they were going to come in dead last. They were like the 5th or 6th seed in the Western Conference. So watch out for Phoenix. They have a mixture of those veterans now. They also have a mixture of those guys who are kind of up and coming and going into their prime.
Now, let's jump into the middle part of the first round, and we'll get to the end of the lottery and toward the latter half of the draft. Now, the final couple of picks of the lottery, there's 2 that really stood out to me. Number 1, obvious, Halliburton. I love him. I think that, I don't know if Sacramento's a great fit, but I love him as a player. I think that he can develop into a nice player in this league. And the other one, Aaron Nesmith, who the Celtics took at number 14, a guy that was dealing with some injury, so there was some concerns. But this was a guy that early on they said was going to be a top 10 pick based on the talent and the shooting ability. What do you think about the lower part of the lottery? Did anything stand out to you?
Yeah, well, you mentioned Halliburton. I also not sure if that's really a great fit, considering they have De'Aaron Fox at the guard position, who's obviously played really well and was a top 5 pick for Sacramento just a few years ago. But I think the Kings need as much talent as they possibly could. So I'm sure they'll try to find a way to make that work. And you mentioned Nesmith. I have a good friend who's a Celtics fan, and he was really happy with that pick. He probably knows a little bit more about him than I do, but I have heard that he's a really good shooter, and especially at the 3-point line. So I think that's a nice pick for them. And Celtics just always had a lot of depth. So just the more depth that they added, I think it's best for them. And then we mentioned, this pick's right outside the lottery, so we'll hold on them because I know we both want to mention them.
And that's who I was going to jump to right away. It's kind of like you were reading my mind. We're getting good at this type of thing. The first pick after the lottery, at number 15, Orlando selects Cole Anthony out of the University of North Carolina, a guy that both you and I have watched very closely during his time at Chapel Hill. Coming into his year at Chapel Hill, Anthony was considered a consensus top 5 pick in this draft. However, we all know how bad it was of a year at Carolina. They go 14-19. Anthony deals with injuries, had surgery. Really wasn't a typical Carolina type of year, but still, he's able to go at number 15. And it was rather interesting because I was covering this for Keeping It Heel. There was 3 teams that Anthony worked out for. He worked out for the Wizards, who had the 9th pick. They obviously weren't taking him in the top 10. The Magic, and then Miami at number 20. And what Anthony said was the latter 2, Miami and Orlando were workouts, and he said he aced them. So to see that he said he aced that, and they end up taking him, it really wasn't a surprise to me that he was selected at number 15.
Yeah, I think simply said, Cole Anthony wanted to go to the warm weather. I mean, he botched the Washington. I'm just kidding. But listen, we both were extremely happy when Cole Anthony committed to North Carolina. You know, at that time, they were projecting him years ahead to possibly a top pick in the NBA draft. And listen, he got off to a hot start last year. I remember that first game, he really lit it up, and we were all like, wow, they really got something here. But ultimately, North Carolina didn't have a great season. They didn't really have a lot of talent around him, and he was a bit injury prone and a bit overrated, I'd say. So he fell a little bit in the draft, right? But he's at 15. He's going to a team in Orlando where I'm not really sure he has much talent around him again. But it is a team that slid into, the 8th spot of the playoffs last year. I guess he'll have some competition there with a former number 1 overall pick in Markelle Fultz if he's still under contract with Orlando. But you know what? I think people still took a chance on him because you see he has a high ceiling and he has a lot of potential and there's a lot of talent there. So ultimately, he just needs some talent around him and he needs to stay healthy. And I think Cole Anthony could be fine. As a Nets fan, I was sitting there saying, listen, we had the 19th pick. He was still on the board. That's the one guy I was looking at. It would have been nice. And I did see him in some mock drafts. But once he was gone, as a Nets fan, I was like, okay, I'm ready to trade out of here. And that's ultimately what the Nets ended up doing.
Before I kind of cover what you were saying about the Nets in that retrospect, because I am on the same page as you are in regards to that, but I feel that this NBA draft process, of all the players in this draft, the one guy that really was impacted by all the talk and the slander was Cole Anthony. And like you said, there was times where you could say a ball hog type of guard. You could say that he was overrated. There was rumors that he's a bad teammate and that there's a lot more behind the scenes that people don't know. And you saw that the Carolina guys, and I think that they deserve a lot of credit for standing up and protecting their teammate, whether it's a show or not. But you saw guys like Armando Bacot, Garrison Brooks, Andrew Plotek, who have a lot of say in the Carolina world, come out and say, look, what you guys are saying is wrong. This guy's a great teammate. He's a great friend. Stop dragging his name in the mud. Just because we had a bad season doesn't mean that you can really blame Cole for it all. I think he has the most to prove out of anybody in this draft. And I think that going to Orlando, he's going to have an opportunity to do that. Because I'm going to use you as an example because it's very hard to name people on the Magic. I can name Mo Bamba and Fultz. Other than that, you're out of luck. So it's a situation where he's going to be in a very similar place that he was in Carolina. Not a lot of talent, and he's going to have to go and improve that he's more than just a shooting guard. Because essentially, that's what he became at Carolina. He became a very ball-hungry guard, and the passing numbers weren't there. And you can question, the health wasn't there, and the offensive scheme, he didn't really gel in it right away. But out of all the players in this draft class, he definitely, in my opinion, has the most to prove. Now, in regards to the Nets, I thought that would have been such a nice pick for them because I thought that it would have been a nice trade piece because obviously, you talked about it before. They're trying to get bigger fish. They're not trying to develop somebody. They have Kyrie Irving at the point. But now you call Houston and you say, look, we got Cole Anthony. Guy was supposed to be a top 5 pick. Now maybe you could keep a Karis LeVert or a Spencer Dinwiddie, somebody of that caliber, because you're able to use him as a trade asset. I thought that as soon as they made that pick and the Nets traded out, I thought the correlation was there between the two.
Yeah, and a big thing with Cole Anthony and Orlando is considering up until just midway through last college basketball season, this kid was projected to be a top pick. So look, at 15 for Orlando, that could be an absolute steal for them. I mean, just because Cole Anthony didn't end up being a top pick doesn't necessarily mean he won't pan out to be what he should have been. So I think it could be a steal for them. And as for the Nets, I think he would have been a nice piece to the puzzle because Kyrie, although they have Kyrie, and whether Cole Anthony was going to be a trade bait or he was actually going to be a rotational guy for them, Kyrie is not a guy who's always healthy either. So if you're replacing him with Cole Anthony, I would have been all for that as a Nets fan. But I do think it would have been nice to throw into a trade package for James Harden because Houston didn't have a top, draft pick. So you're getting one of those top guys. But we did mention the Nets and what ended up coming of that. So I might as well just bring that up now. The Nets were involved in a 3-team trade. Ultimately, what ended up happening was the Nets traded the 19th pick to the Detroit Pistons. Detroit Pistons ended up taking Sadiq Bey out of Villanova. I believe he's a big man out of Villanova. The Nets ended up receiving Landry Shamet of the LA Clippers, and the LA Clippers ended up getting Luke Kennard, who is out of Duke just a few years back, a guy that I don't believe me or Nick really were big fans of because we're not really big Dukey guys. But Nick, what do you think about that trade?
I loved it because I thought that just like a trade for or selection of Cole Anthony would have been, you get somebody who can fill in the rotation regardless of what happens. And number one, you could use him as a trade chip, but I don't think that was the intent of getting him. I think that it was to fill in voids if they do make a big splash. But you add more shooting. Joe Harris, one of the best three-point shooters ever. Kevin Durant, a very good three-point shooter. Shamet, a very good three-point shooter. You're adding pieces to the puzzle. And I think that in the offense they're going to run with, and we've talked about it, the Steve Nash and Mike D'Antoni kind of formation, they're going to need all the shooters they can get. So I loved it. I didn't think that there was anybody on the board at 19 that could have came in and impacted them right away. So I thought that getting a veteran player with big game experience was a good thing for them.
Yeah, I think it's like I mentioned earlier. I mean, if you're a Nets fan, you're sitting there at 19. For me, the moment Cole Anthony was off the board, I really was kind of sitting there like, who else do we take? So once like the trade came through and we got who we got, I was like, wow, he's going to fit really nicely. Whether he's part of the future, whether he's like a piece that they want to have in the rotation, the way he could shoot the ball. There's been some question marks about his defense, but like it's kind of like some people think, oh, well, another guy they added who can't play defense. On the other side of it, they say works really hard on the defensive side of the ball. But he's a guy with a little bit of experience now, some playoff experience. He's obviously a really good three-point shooter. I mean, he shot 40% from the field. And I think he could fit their offense nicely. I mean, I don't know what type of offense they're going to run yet, but if I'm looking at Steve Nash and Mike D'Antoni, D'Antoni was Nash's coach back in Phoenix in the early 2000s, where he won back-to-back MVPs, and they were all based around scoring. They led the league in scoring. And then D'Antoni, who just left Houston, he had them as one of the top scoring teams in the league as well, and the amount of times they were shooting the three ball. So if you look at the pieces on the Nets team, you have Kyrie who can shoot the three. We obviously know how lethal Kevin Durant is. But then you have Joe Harris, a very underrated guy, won the three-point contest just 2 years ago, I believe it was. You bring in Landry, so I think they're in a nice position. Whether they want to keep it that way or not, they're just adding more pieces to this team. And bringing in Landry, what that allows you to do now is if you need to get rid of a Joe Harris or you need to get rid of a Karis LeVert or however you want to piece it together, you could technically put together a nice trade package and get James Harden if that's ultimately what they want to do. And I think that is ultimately what they want to do. But Houston's, they're making it uncomfortable. That's all the headlines you see on ESPN. They're making it uncomfortable for people because they want to try to get as much as they possibly could for him. And I can't blame them for that.
Oh, absolutely. And, you can never have too much talent. So it's a good thing for the Nets. They didn't end up making a first-round pick, but they ended up getting Landry Shamet, who's going to be a really nice role player for them moving forward if they elect to keep him. Now, the Knicks had a little wheeling and dealing at the end of the first round, too. They were supposed to pick 25 and then early on or 27 and 38, and then they ended up making two trades, which ended up having them pick 25 and 32. They were holding the 23rd pick at one point, took an international player, but they ended up trading that pick to the Oklahoma City Thunder, got the 25th overall pick, and took Emmanuel Quickly out of the University of Kentucky, a guard, SEC Player of the Year. It's rather interesting, but one of the Knicks assistant coaches actually coached at Kentucky last year, so he had Quickly in the mix. So maybe the Knicks saw Toppin available at 8 and said, Quickly's a guy that our coaching staff is high on. He's a guy we can land later on in the draft, and we can worry about the point guard position later on.
Yeah, I remember hearing a little bit about the hype of him going to Kentucky last year. Calipari does a nice job of bringing in top recruits, so this kid has a lot of potential. And we were mentioning, when they took Toppin at number 8, that's just more pieces added to the front court. When are you going to bring in some guard play? And I know the Knicks have some talented young guards, but, they need as much help as they could possibly get. And I think it was a nice pick for them, especially that that late in the draft at what pick was it
It
now?
ended up being
Because they're all
25.
25. Yeah, I mean, look at the end of the first round. So you're getting some talent there for sure.
Now, out of the first round, I know we covered Nets and Knicks a lot, but did you classify anybody as a winner? And it could be multiple teams.
It's interesting because as a Nets fan, people were actually saying the Nets won the draft based on the trade that they made and who they added to the team. But I gotta think to myself, I really did like the Hornets pick with LaMelo, and I believe they got Vernon Carey.
I wasn't super impressed by him at Duke. I did get an opportunity to watch him on ESPN when he was in high school. I know he was a highly touted recruit out of high school. Then he learned under Coach K for an entire year, and we all have a lot of respect for Coach K. We know that if you have a chance to play under him, you're only going to develop as a player. So I think for Charlotte to get him in the second round at the position that they did is a great addition because there's a lot of value in that pick. I'm impressed by Golden State's draft as well. I think for them to be in the situation that they were due to injuries and to fill a position of need like the center position, this is a team that has so much talent on it already. And they went to how many NBA Finals in a row and won championships without a true center. And now they get a chance to bring in a 7'1" kid in James Wiseman with all the talent that he has. That's huge for them. And then also being in that situation on draft night, not knowing the extent of Klay Thompson's new injury, they were able to get a guy like Nico Mannion from Arizona in the second round who has, he's a good ball handler. He also could knock down shots. So whether they feel he's going to fill a void with Klay gone or he's going to be off the bench learning from Curry and eventually Klay, it's a nice pickup by them. But as a Nets fan, I ultimately have to go back to them as well. I think they made a great decision in the draft to pass on that 19th pick, trade it away, and bring in a guy like Landry Shamet who shoots 40% from the three. They claim he plays good defense. I mean, it's questionable at times, but ultimately, whether he's a piece to the puzzle or he's trade bait, I think it was a nice choice by them to add more talent to an already talented playoff contending team.
So there's a couple of teams that I would classify as winners. Number one, I would classify your Brooklyn Nets as a winner. I know you're going to probably have a big smile on your face hearing that, but I would classify them as a winner. You get a key player that you could throw into the mix. That's not a guarantee in any given draft. The teams that we kind of talked about, LaMelo, I think that's a great fit in not New Orleans, in Charlotte. You have that pick. I mentioned Jalen Smith before. I think Phoenix did a really nice job. The other team that made two picks that I loved was the Boston Celtics. You take a chance on Nesmith. If he's healthy, I think they got the best shooter in the draft. And then later on in the first round, they get Peyton Pritchard out of Oregon. The kid's a winner, 4-year player over there. A really solid contributor. I think that off the bench, he'll be a really nice piece for them moving forward. So those are kind of my winners here. But if I had to pick a true winner, I would probably say Brooklyn because you don't know what these players are going to pan out to be. You know what Shamet is. So to get a player like that, it does make a huge difference. Now, let's talk about some of the second round guys before we kind of wrap it up for today. Was there anybody that really surprised you that they fell into the second round of the draft?
I'm taking a look at the second round right now because I did mention Vernon Carey. I wasn't that impressed with him at Duke, but this is actually a fun fact that we should have mentioned earlier. This is the first time since 2000 that a Duke, UNC, Kentucky, and Kansas player did not go in the lottery. So sometimes, even though I'm not a big fan of these guys, they end up finding their way in the lotteries because they're such highly touted players coming out of high school. They go to these big colleges and then they're on the big stage in the spotlight, and they end up getting drafted sooner than they should. So that's a guy that comes to mind. You also have to think of Trey Jones, his teammate, right? Once again, not high on him, but his brother was a first-round pick. So sometimes people look into that. Also, fun fact to mention, the Ball brothers, Lonzo and LaMelo. First ever brothers to go top 5 in the draft. So shout out to them. But, I'm looking at Cassius Winston was a nice pickup, I think. Veteran kid out of Michigan State. But I think everyone there, for the most part, fell to where, they should be. But those are some of the big names, I guess you can make a case for being technically late round picks if they would have went anywhere.
Now, are we going to have to start like a Kyle's fact segment here? Like, are we going to have to do like a specialized segment with all your facts? Those are really good facts to give out to our listeners here.
I think that this draft being virtual, and weak, they were just pulling out facts anywhere they could. Really, they were finding facts about anything. But I thought it was pretty interesting because it was very like there were a lot of siblings involved. There were a lot of players with fathers who played in the NBA, right? You have Kenya Martin's son. I'm a Nets fan. I remember watching him when I was growing up. So even Cole Anthony's father was a big time player too. So it was they were talking about a lot of they're bringing up a lot of facts. I might as well just mention them too.
Hey, we're glad you did because it brings a lot of good content to the show. But like you mentioned, Carey was a guy that I thought was going to be an end of the first round pick. I think that what hurt him, and we saw it when they played Carolina, the dude can't stay out of foul trouble. Like, the guy played like 10 minutes in the one game, he had 4 fouls already. So I thought that was something that really hurt him. A big physical presence. If the Hornets can develop him, I think that's a really nice grab at 32. And then you look at some of these guys, Trey Jones going 41 to the Spurs. I think that'll be a nice fit. Pop will develop him into a guard. I really can't stand him because he's from Duke, but it is what it is. The guy who I thought was going to be a first round pick that really slipped, there was a lot of speculation around Jordan Noora from Louisville. He goes to the Bucks at 45. Really good shooter, really good playmaker. I thought that somebody would have taken a chance on him a little earlier in this draft. However, he kind of slipped. And to me, Cassius Winston screamed Los Angeles Lakers to me. I don't know why, but he did. And they didn't take him. He ends up getting actually drafted by the Thunder, traded to the Wizards. That's a guy that I'm really happy for. And then Cassius Stanley at 54 to the Pacers. I think he should have stayed in school because his draft stock really took a hit. The one guy I want to mention that I really was hoping was going to get drafted, Powell out of Seton Hall. He signed with the Knicks, but I was really hoping he was going to get drafted. I think he's going to be an impact player in this league. I love the way what he brings to the table. I've watched a lot of Seton Hall games to just watch him, but he's a guy I'll be rooting for.
Yeah, he was fun to watch. I think just being like a local team, you root for them, and was one of their top players. I believe he was a senior, so this was his last shot. That's another guy. I mentioned Obi Toppin and Dayton, but you also have to mention him because Seton Hall had a nice season, and for those seniors, or I don't know if Toppin is a senior, but I mean based on the season that he had, he was going to leave regardless. But Powell was a senior, and he did a lot of work at Seton Hall. And for him to kind of miss out on that last opportunity to try to win a national championship really sucks. So he was one of the guys I was thinking about. And I think, they were mentioning on ESPN a lot when COVID basically took down March Madness.
And that could have impacted the draft, too. A lot of these guys didn't get a chance to play on the biggest stage. So that's something that, we can't really harbor on it because obviously it happened. But you have to make a case that, if a Carolina squeezes into the tournament somehow, as a lower seed, and Cole Anthony has a couple of good games, does he get drafted 15? Or the Duke guys, if they make a deep run, do we see all three of them fall to the second round? We'll never know now, but now they'll have the opportunity to kind of shine in the game's biggest stage. Final thoughts for today's show.
It was nice to be back. We, like I said at the beginning of the show, we haven't talked sports in a while, and I feel like I was holding back a lot. I had a lot to get out. But I'm glad we talked about the NBA draft because I've always been a big fan of the draft process. I really enjoy it, and I love basketball. But what were your thoughts on it?
I'm happy to be back. Obviously, we had a little bit of a hiatus between season 1 and season 2. I couldn't get that one out, but I'm glad to be back. We have a lot more content coming for everybody. What you're going to see, we should give them a little bit of an update. What you're going to see is we're going to focus on one topic. We're going to release a little more mini-series. So it's not every Thursday, but we're going to give you a little more content as the weeks go on, especially during the holiday season. You're going to have some baseball rumors. You're going to have some NBA stuff starting up again. You're going to have the NFL. I know that Kyle's got his big tank for the Jets, and he's excited for that. So I'm sure we'll be talking about that in the near future. But continue to follow us on our social media feeds. Obviously, if you're watching on YouTube, hit that little red button on the bottom of the screen to subscribe. You'll get all the information regarding our upcoming broadcasts that are presented to you. And we thank you all again for listening in. We appreciate all the listeners, and hopefully you guys continue to come back for more.
Yeah, guys, thanks for tuning in. I'm glad to be back, and we look forward to you guys tuning into the next episode.